This is the tragedy that inspired Ordinary World, the song that brought Duran Duran back and revealed the most personal moment of Simon Le Bon's life. In the next few minutes, you'll hear how a death in 1986, years of silent grief, and a world at war all converged into one song that quietly changed everything for the band. Where Duran Duran stood before Ordinary World. By the early 1990s, Duran Duran were standing in a very different place than the one that defined their rise in the previous decade. The band that once dominated MTV, sold out arenas, and set the visual standard for pop music no longer occupied the cultural center they had ruled throughout the 1980s. Musical tastes had shifted, and the glossy new wave sound that once felt untouchable no longer guaranteed attention. At the same time, the group itself had changed. The classic lineup that fueled their biggest years had fractured, and by the time work began on what would become the Wedding album, Duran Duran were operating with a different internal dynamic. This period was not about momentum, it was about reassessment. Instead of chasing the style that made them famous, the band found themselves writing from a quieter, more reflective place, shaped by distance from their peak and uncertainty about their future. The confidence that came with constant chart success was gone, replaced by questions about relevance, identity, and direction. That shift mattered, because the music coming out of this era was not designed to relive the past. It reflected where the band actually stood at that moment. Simon Le Bon approached this chapter differently than before. Image and spectacle no longer led the process, and emotional clarity mattered more than presentation. Years of experiences, including personal loss that had never fully surfaced in their music, sat beneath the surface. The Wedding album emerged from that mindset, carrying songs that sounded more grounded and less performative than what listeners expected from Duran Duran. Rather than trying to prove they still belonged, the band focused on writing material that felt honest to their circumstances. And that environment, shaped by distance from fame and a need for recalibration, created the conditions for Ordinary World to exist at all. The personal tragedy behind the song. The emotional center of Ordinary World leads back to 1986, the year Simon Le Bon lost a close friend named David Miles. According to documented accounts, Miles died from a drug overdose, specifically heroin, and the loss marked Le Bon deeply, even though it did not immediately surface in his songwriting. At the time, there was no public tribute and no song released directly in response. Life continued, albums were made, and the band moved forward, but the absence remained unresolved beneath the surface. Years later, Le Bon would explain that grief does not always arrive on schedule. In his case, the emotional weight of losing Miles grew heavier with time rather than fading. He described feeling a pressure inside him years after his friend's death, something unfinished that refused to settle on its own. Ordinary World became part of what Le Bon later identified as a trilogy of songs connected to that loss. The first appeared in 1988 with Do You Believe in Shame, followed by Ordinary World, and finally Out of My Mind in 1997. Placed together, those songs trace a long emotional arc rather than a single moment of mourning. What sets Ordinary World apart is how directly it functions as release. Le Bon explained that writing the song allowed him to let go of something he had carried internally for years. He was also explicit about what the song was not meant to be. Le Bon stated that he is not a believer in the supernatural, and the song was not written as a message to the dead or a spiritual conversation. Instead, it addressed the reality of living in a world where someone important is permanently missing. That perspective shaped the song's restraint. Rather than describing the loss in literal terms, Ordinary World focuses on the emotional aftermath, capturing how grief quietly alters the way the world feels long after the event itself has passed. Writing during a world in conflict. Ordinary World took shape in 1992, and the timing mattered more than it might seem at first. This was the period of the first Gulf War, and the scale of what was happening globally reshaped how Simon Le Bon viewed personal grief. Rather than writing from an isolated emotional space, Le Bon framed his own sorrow against events that were far larger than any single individual. War was dominating headlines, images of conflict were constant, and the world felt unstable in a way that went beyond personal loss. That environment directly influenced the tone and perspective of the song. Le Bon later explained that Specific lyrics were tied to this moment, including references to holy war and holy need, which reflected the conflict unfolding at the time. The intention was not to equate his private pain with global suffering, but to acknowledge how small individual grief can feel when measured against widespread violence and loss. And that's where the emotional restraint of Ordinary World comes from. Instead of dramatizing his feelings, Laban described his sorrow as just a little sorrowed talk, a phrase that deliberately minimizes personal pain in comparison to the scale of war. That choice shaped the song's voice, keeping it grounded and reflective rather than intense or confrontational. What nobody expected was how effectively that contrast would work. By placing personal grief inside a broader human context, the song avoided self-pity and gained perspective. Loss became something quietly carried, not loudly announced. This approach also explains why the song feels measured rather than overwhelming. The lyrics do not demand attention. They sit calmly with the listener, acknowledging pain without trying to dominate the emotional space. Writing during the Gulf War also reinforced the song's central theme of searching for stability. When the world feels chaotic, both globally and personally, the desire for something familiar becomes stronger. Ordinary World captured that feeling precisely. It reflected a moment when headlines were filled with conflict, and personal life no longer felt predictable, creating a shared emotional backdrop that extended beyond Laban's own experience. That balance between the private and the global gave the song its quiet strength, allowing it to resonate without needing explanation or spectacle. What Ordinary World is actually saying. At its core, Ordinary World speaks from a place of emotional disorientation rather than raw grief. Simon Le Bon described the song as coming from the perspective of someone who wakes up and no longer recognizes the world around them, and that feeling shapes every part of the lyric. Loss, in this case, is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, and destabilizing. The phrase Ordinary World itself reflects a desire for grounding. It represents a longing to return to something familiar, stable, and recognizable after life has been altered by events that cannot be undone. The song is not about escaping pain, but about learning how to exist alongside it. Le Bon never framed the song as a literal account of his friend's death. There are no names, dates, or direct references to David Miles in the lyrics. That omission was intentional. By keeping the language broad, the song avoids being locked into a single story. Instead, it focuses on the emotional aftermath of loss, the way it quietly changes how everyday life feels. Familiar routines lose their comfort. The world looks the same, but it no longer feels the same. Le Bon explained that the song reflects someone who has woken up into a world that feels strange, and that sense of displacement is what listeners respond to most strongly. The grief exists beneath the surface, shaping perception rather than dominating it. This approach also marked a clear shift in how Duran Duran expressed emotion. Known for style, confidence, and visual impact, the band released a song built on restraint and reflection. There is no excess here, no attempt to overwhelm the listener. Instead, the song creates space. That space allows listeners to project their own experiences onto the lyrics, which is why Ordinary World has been interpreted in so many ways over time. Some hear it as a response to global unrest, others as a song about personal separation or emotional exhaustion. Those interpretations work because the song was never meant to explain itself fully. It captures a feeling rather than a narrative, and that feeling remains recognizable long after the original circumstances have faded. In that sense, Ordinary World is not just a song about loss. It is about the quiet work of adjusting to a life that no longer matches the one you expected. Release, reception, and a surprising comeback. The release of Ordinary World did not follow a typical rollout, and that unexpected path played a role in how quickly the song connected with listeners. The track officially debuted in the United States on December 19, 1992, with the UK release following on January 18, 1993, but its impact had already begun earlier. Months before the formal release, the song started circulating on American radio. Stations began playing it ahead of schedule, and the response was immediate. According to documented accounts, this early exposure triggered a cease and desist order, yet the momentum did not slow. Radio listeners reacted strongly. DJS reported receiving hundreds of calls from people asking about the song, which meant audience demand was driving the process rather than label planning. That reaction helped push the track into official release faster than expected. Once it entered the charts, the scale of the comeback became clear. In January 1993, Ordinary World debuted at number 67 on the Billboard Hot 100. Over the following weeks, steady airplay and audience response carried it upward, and by February 20th, 1993, the song had reached number 3. Other charts told a similar story. The track climbed to number 1 on Billboard's mainstream Top 40 chart and reached number 2 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart, showing that it connected across different radio formats. In the UK, the song peaked at number 6. For a band many had quietly assumed belonged to a previous era, this performance reframed the conversation entirely. Ordinary World was not treated as a nostalgic throwback. It was received as something current, reflective, and emotionally grounded. The result was more than a hit single. It marked a turning point, reintroducing Duran Duran to a new audience while proving they could evolve without abandoning their identity. The video and its symbolism. The music video for Ordinary World reinforced the song's emotional restraint rather than competing with it. Directed by Nick Egan and produced by Nina Deluhi, the video was commissioned by Parlophone and filmed in December 1992 at Huntington Gardens in San Marino, California. Instead of placing Duran Duran at the center of the narrative, the video used a wedding setting to create contrast. A celebration unfolds on screen, full of movement and ritual, while projections of the band appear over the scenes, watching rather than participating. That visual distance mattered. The band's presence feels suspended, almost detached, which mirrors the emotional perspective of the song itself. Life continues, milestones happen, and people gather to mark important moments, yet something remains unresolved beneath the surface. The choice of Huntington Gardens added to that atmosphere. The setting is elegant and calm, creating a sense of beauty that contrasts with the emotional dislocation implied by the song. Rather than dramatizing loss, the video allows it to exist quietly in the background. This approach marked a clear departure from Duran Duran's earlier visual identity. Known for high-energy, style-driven videos in the 1980s, the band embraced understatement here. There is no spectacle designed to overwhelm the viewer. Instead, the focus stays on mood and distance. By positioning the band as observers rather than performers, the video reflects the song's theme of feeling present in the world, while emotionally removed from it. The projections suggest memory, reflection, and presence without connection. Released on January 18, 1993, the video helped solidify Ordinary World as something distinct within the band's catalog. It supported the song's tone rather than reshaping it, allowing the music to carry the emotional weight. Together, the video and the song formed a unified statement, showing a band willing to step back, strip away excess, and let restraint speak louder than spectacle. Legacy, recognition, and how the song is understood. Recognition for Ordinary World followed quickly, and it reflected more than chart success. In 1994, the song received the PRS Most Performed Work honor at the Ivor Novello Awards, confirming how heavily it was played and how widely it had been embraced. It was also listed among nominees for Best Song musically and lyrically, placing it in a different category than a typical comeback single. That recognition mattered because it reframed how Duran Duran were being discussed. The band was no longer judged solely by their past image or their 1980s dominance. Instead, Ordinary World positioned them as artists capable of restraint, reflection, and emotional clarity. Years later, that impact remains measurable. In October 2021, the official charts company ranked Ordinary World as Duran Duran's second most streamed song in the UK, showing that the track continues to reach listeners long after its original release. That longevity points to connection rather than nostalgia. Over time, the song has taken on multiple interpretations. Some listeners hear it primarily as a response to global instability, shaped by the Gulf War context in which it was written. Others interpret it as a song about personal separation, emotional exhaustion, or the quiet aftermath of loss. Simon Le Bon has never dismissed those readings, but he has consistently acknowledged the personal tragedy at the song's core, rooted in the death of his friend David Miles. That foundation anchors the song, even as its meaning expands for different listeners. The balance between private grief and broader reflection explains why Ordinary World continues to resonate. It does not force a single interpretation or demand a specific emotional response. Instead, it leaves space. The song remains grounded in real loss, shaped by real events, and open enough to meet listeners wherever they are, which is why its relevance has endured across decades. Ordinary World didn't last because it was a comeback hit. It lasted because it told the truth quietly about loss, perspective, and learning how to live after something breaks.